Okay, so on behalf of University for Life, allow me to welcome you to the second annual Creativity and Culture Conference. My name is Jesvia Mahil and I am the director for University for Life, which is an education consultancy specializing in development of creativity skills. And Prith, how about you? Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, okay, yes. Thank you for the invitation to take part. Yeah, my name's Prith and I'm a creative consultant, to want of a better term. I started out being a trainer, and my work has grown as people wanted me to come on board and work alongside them as opposed to just delivering workshops. So sort of a creative business consultant. So I work with organisations to help them to develop new creative ideas and implement them. So I mean, it's not just about ideas, it's more about implementation as well with me now, which is great. And also I'm an artist, so I'm in my studio. It's at the weekend, so this is my work environment. So I've got partly a desk in here, but also I paint in here as well. So that's my creative environment that keeps me going.
Is that one of your paintings behind you?
Yeah, it's nearly finished. Almost.
Yeah, it looks very striking.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Christine then.
Thank you. And again, I echo the thanks for the invitation to be part of this and congratulate you for putting it all together. I think it's amazing. I've been watching the development and I thought, oh my God, well done you. I trained originally as an actor at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School, and my performing arts background gives me a lot of transferable skills. And one of the transferable skills that it has given me has enabled me to do all sorts of work in all sorts of different places. So I work as a dialogue coach on film. I lead the workshop, The Mastery of Self-Expression, which started off in America good 30 years ago, and it is about creativity and looking at the blocks and things that get in the way of us expressing it, and about the expression of creativity. I coach people to speak in public, and everything I do really is orientated around my background in performing arts and more in process. I came to a point where I discovered that I was more interested in process than I was in performing, and so I bring those skills in anyone who wants them, basically.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christine. And Tia, how about yourself?
So again, thank you for having me for the first interview that we had, and then this one, which is a group one, and it's even more exciting. So I have been working in the marketing and communications industry for about 15 years now, and I head up innovation, the innovation function at a big company. But on the side also, probably about 12 years ago, I trained as a yoga and mindfulness teacher. And then I started my own company, which is called Unlock Your Block. And it's very much focused on using mindfulness and yoga to unleash creativity, but also become more confident in whichever part of life. It could be confident public speaker, confident just in going about life and feeling empowered. So that's what I do.
Okay, excellent. So I'll start with a question that emerged when I was doing my interview with Christine. Christine, you talk about your work with communication, and we touched on the fact that it's almost, it is to do with survival skills. We communicate in order to survive. And Prith, you're an artist, and artists have a reputation of breaking the rules, of not conforming, and so how is that kind of related? Rules and societal norms are usually there to protect us from harming others and harming ourselves. So in terms of survival skills, how do we tally up those two conflicting kind of expressions of communication? So on one hand, we want to be creative and to express ourselves and break the rules, break the norms, but how does that link up with our survival within society? Christine, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, that's a very good question, very interesting. It's so big that one of the things I think is, if we look at rule breaking, and risk-taking. Obviously, there's a huge, great spectrum, and it can be very, very bad news, very, very devastating, and so on. But I think, although, of course, on the spot, I can't think of any actual examples, but invariably, growth and innovation tends to come from rule breakers. It tends to come from areas where people want to do something differently. There's a way it's been done, and that's the rule, then that's the way it gets done. And it's the people who go beyond that, that one could define as rule breakers, that actually make a difference. And then if you take it to the really other extreme, where there are rules that are actually not good for human beings. You know, if you look at dictatorships and the rules that are created there, and very often it's the people who are who fight against that that actually make a real difference in the world. If you look at any political system, and I have no desire or intention to become political in this particular forum, but an awful lot of things happen because people go beyond the rules. Now, obviously, maybe when you're driving a car, actually staying to the rules of the 70-mile-an-hour limit is a good idea so that you don't kill yourself or anybody else. So there are rules and there are rules, I think.
And this sounds a little bit naff, like management speak, but creativity speak in the world. They always say that to survive, you have to be creative.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's about saying that, you know, it's survival's here and creativity over there, because to survive, we have to be creative, and to develop, we have to be creative. And just think about, you know, we invented the wheel, we invent all these things, and that's all about how we've developed and how society's developed. So although it sounds a bit naff, but creativity survival is dependent on creativity.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think it sounds naff at all.
Yeah.
I don't think it sounds naff at all. I mean, that's the baseline that I operate from. That it's part of the human condition that we are creative. And as little ones, we will create ways to get our needs met because we're born to survive. So we'll get our needs met by creating with perhaps very few resources around us, but we will create with those resources, and we will survive. So I'm totally with you on that.
And I think last time we spoke about startups and the difference between startups and big companies, that just exactly because there's less rules that have to be followed at a startup, they tend to be much more innovative in their thinking, to the point that now, like, bigger companies are looking to how can they incorporate that thinking, that mentality, and moving as fast as startups do, because they can incorporate more of that flexible thinking and don't have such rigid rules. So I guess, you know, that rules often can be self-imposed in a way, especially when an organization or a company becomes bigger and bigger. And it doesn't necessarily mean that breaking those rules or going against them can be just as bad as breaking a rule, such as going faster on the road. So there's rules are rules, and I think with startups is a great example of when they can be broken.
And the interesting thing is, I know we're probably going to talk about kids and how people are brought up, but we're bringing up people now to follow the rules, aren't we? We're not bringing up people to question, and the whole education system is about following the rules, learning what to learn, so you pass your exams. We're not bringing up people to question and break rules. And so we forget how to do it, which is the awful thing. So when you get to a position and you want to be innovative and creative, it's like, so you have to, you know, unblock yourself. Like Tia, you were saying, I think that's a really important thing. To be creative, we've got to unleash or take the straitjacket off so that we can even think creatively and start breaking some rules, because we're just it's drummed into us, isn't it, that we must follow and say yes to authority, and authority knows, and whatever you read in a book must be true and not to question. So this is just like loads, and you have to question everything as well as break rules.
You see, Chris, you say that, but you talk about, we're teaching children, we're teaching students to obey the rules, but it's always been the case throughout the centuries, as far as I can tell, because when you think about Socrates, for example, you know, the Greek philosopher Socrates,
Mm-hmm.
he was killed for training his students to question everything. That was his method for teaching, was to, you know, students were just asked to question, and he was executed for that. So I think that throughout the ages, people have always been taught to obey rules, because that's how society maintains itself. Because if people don't obey the rules, then society will fragment, it will, you know, be torn apart. So it's about.
But will it though? Will it though? That's just the. I think that's just the way they. The way they keep us down, or because it's in people's interest for us to obey orders, because
Absolutely.
it's an you know, the government or whoever, they don't want a chaotic, anarchistic state, do they? Not that we would be. All we want to do is ask a few questions, but people don't like that because it threatens. Teachers don't particularly like it because it threatens their authority. Other people don't like it because we also, in organisations we live in, they can be quite hierarchical. Someone spent a lot of time to get to their position as chief exec, or, you know, the director or whatever. They're not going to have some young start questioning what they do, because it's very cultural, isn't it? And that's the thing we need to break out from. And there's lots of things come into it, but questioning is like the key to a creative mind, a curious mind.
Depends on the.
I think it also has to do.
It depends on the intent behind the questioning, because we can question out of curiosity, and we can question to challenge. And so Christine earlier on alluded to some of the political kind of upheavals. That's because people were questioning authority. In other words, challenging authority. They weren't being curious and being creative. They were being disruptive, you know. So
I think that is one way of looking at it, certainly. But in terms of actually, I think people do that very often. It's like, because so much of our lives are ruled, in my opinion, by people hanging on to their power. And lots of rules and regulations are created. It's the same with the example that you gave, the Greek philosopher. Yes, if people start to ask questions, then they're going to start to challenge the way they're being ruled. So one way of doing it is killing the person who's encouraging people to ask questions.
It depends who we're questioning, doesn't it? You know, if we're questioning authority, that's very different to, you know, questioning our peers, for example, who don't.
But why shouldn't we question authority, and why shouldn't we question what's written in a book? Do we just think because something's there, it must be true? And that's not the case, is it? It's just somebody's opinion. Everything is just somebody's opinion. Even if they've backed it up by something, you can do something else and find new research to back up something else.
Galileo is a great example of that. I mean, he came up with the idea that actually the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, that the sun was.
He was killed too, and he was killed as well.
Yeah, so that's a huge risk to take. Obviously, he was backed up by everything, his own experience, but that was one hell of a rule to break.
Yeah.
To me, going back to this notion of the fact that education takes us to think in a certain way and not question, I also think that, you know, there's been created some space to normalize the questioning, which is, you know, artists or creative people. You know, if you're an artist, you're most allowed to question and go off the book. But if you work in a different job, or you follow a different career, like becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer, then that's when, you know, we try and keep the left brain kind of ruling, and people don't feel that they can be creative in every facet of their life or whatever path they choose, because creativity and question has been normalized only if you're an artist or if you take a certain path in life, which I think is what we should really try and undo for children, so that they don't feel that creativity is only associated with arts or with certain paths that you take in life, but can really flourish in any choice that you make in your life.
Yeah, definitely. And I really dislike, you know, there's a whole phrase of creative industries. And I think that's a really awful term, because every industry can be creative. And I think it doesn't do anyone any favors by having that tagline. And even the whole thing about artists, you know, and I often think, the link between an artist and creativity, and people think, oh, it's obviously, but sometimes with some art, I don't know, are we just replicating what is there? So if you're a still life artist, you're just representing what's there. It's certain types of art, I think, that breaks rules, not all art. And if you speak to some people when they go to art school, they still are, you know, taught art theory, they teach art history, and it's almost like, I don't know how much they're allowed to break the rules. It's almost like we can only follow what's already been done, but whether we can break the rules is also a different matter. So I don't think it's always the fact that artists are the most creative people either.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there are so many artists who are not creative at all because their work is very formulaic, you know.
Yeah, I don't think that's creative, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do think business, the whole business world is where creativity is actually. I think it's fascinating, that world. Don't know what other people think.
I think that with the creatives and the creative industries that you talk about, Prith, you know, there's this kind of protectionism. You know, they say, well, we're creative and you're not because you're not the creative.
And artists, yeah.
I agree totally that business and innovation in business is incredibly creative, and that that creativity in business is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And I think that the idea of it's only artists that are creative isn't accurate. It's a toss, really. It's toss. And it's much more individual than that as well. I mean, the sort of packaging of this particular occupation, this particular that is creative or isn't creative. I think it's very dependent on the people who get involved with it. And I think it's incredibly creative to imagine that you can replace the heart. You know what I mean? I know it was quite a while ago now, but somebody actually sat down and thought, right, there's a heart that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I wonder what would happen if we took that heart out and put another heart in. That to me is the most incredible piece of creativity. Yeah. And I shudder a little at any divisions that say this is creative and this isn't, this is creative and this isn't, and this is creative and this isn't. I think it's the definition of creativity is extremely flexible, I think. And if it does get boxed in and there are rules around it, it seems to me to be an extreme contradiction in terms to have rules about creativity.
But then we go back to that thing of, well, if everything is creative and everyone is creative, then the term loses its meaning.
I think that maybe you're right. I don't know. I think that, you know, to coin a very hackneyed phrase, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. That's why I really think it's important that whatever we create, whatever it is, that the proof of that creativity is outside of us. Once we create something, then and it's presented to the world, whether it's, you know, a new form of sellotape, or how to get to the moon, or a child who suddenly put together carrots and made a masterpiece. You know, whatever it is, that once it's out there, we know what we've got, and once it's out there and it's seen by other people, then that's where our creativity lives. And I think it's true of business. I think it's true of everything. We can have a creativity inside us, and we can have our thoughts and all the rest of it. But once we actually give it to the world, excuse me, in any form, that's where creativity really exists.
I think it was.
Hi guys, my name's Olivia. I've crashed out a little bit, so I'm sorry I'm a little bit late in. But I came in on the bit where I heard someone saying about we don't teach to be creative. The curriculum is actually set up for us to be incredibly creative, but the way our school and our structures are set up, people are uploaded with so much marking, so much paperwork, we're doing so many reports, apart from doing the creativity things that we should be doing in the classroom. And I think that stops us as teachers, as educators, for actually getting down to doing our jobs. We're just not being able to do our jobs. It's not because we don't want to. It's, you know, we're bombarded with so many other things other than doing the real art of teaching that's going to make children creative.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because that's the whole thing about public sector and how it can be different when you work in the public sector and the private sector, and the value they place on creativity and the different targets you have. You know, and it's a shame that teaching is like that it's even creativity is thought of something separate, because really ideally it should be integrated into everything, just how you work, how you're allowed to behave, and that you've got time to do that, and there isn't it's almost like there's too much pressure, especially on teachers, on the marking and the grading and the target, and it's almost like they've forgotten what education should really be about.
I agree with you totally, because it's almost like we work towards the targets you're going to get for Ofsted, and in the middle of it, all that fun stuff that you could actually be creating in the classroom to make it exciting, there's no time for it. It's just getting the task done that's going to put the marks on the paper. And I think, as I said in an earlier interview, I think we lose the children in that way. So, you know, the whole art of creativity, you don't see it, not in the way that, you know, traditional teaching should be, or in the way that we were grown up with traditional teaching. It's just not that way informed. I do business, and is like the lady said, Christine said just a moment ago, business is so creative, and it's the one thing that you have an awful lot of computers and all the innovative stuff you can get to do with the children. And it's incredible. If you plan it right, it's incredible to watch how they open like a flower, and to take out that internal creativity that each of them have individually. But again, that takes an awful lot of work from a teacher to be able to plan that and incorporate that in the work that we've got in the short space of time that we have to teach it.
What you've just been saying has reminded me of something which is not actually about teaching as such. But I mean, I agree with everything you say. I have friends who are teachers and who would echo exactly what you said. In any situation throughout the world where you find that some sort of there's been some sort of imposition by a government, usually a right-wing government, anywhere in the world, one of the first things they do is they will lock up or kill any creative artists, poets, writers, anybody that is in the sort of the traditional creative. I do appreciate that we're not talking about business here, but what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about, is the fact that anybody who can inspire people to dream, to think, to see alternatives, and to ask questions, which the performing arts, visual arts, and writing, etc., do, those regimes will get shot of them first because they don't want people to question.
Well, in my interview with Olivia earlier, Christine, in my interview with Olivia, we both admire Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is an educator. He's an excellent example of somebody, you know, we're not even talking about Socrates thousands of years ago. We're talking about people like this who is contemporary. He's not alive now, but he's probably died maybe 20, 30 years ago. But he was persecuted in Brazil. He was put in prison, and he had to live in exile in Chile because he was just trying to make education serve the needs of, you know, what he called the oppressed. He wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and for those, you know, for those points of view, you know, he was just looking at education from the student's point of view rather than from those in authority. And so we do still, you know, get sidelined or marginalized. You know, we might not be tortured in prison, but it's kind of near enough.
Yeah,
we challenge and question.
Even though even though I think from the world of business there's so much innovation coming through, I see the same attitude actually emerging in companies, even like perhaps bigger companies, where there still needs to be rules in place. So you end up in a system that still promotes the 9 to 5, being chained at a desk, showing your face, not taking big risks because there's money involved, money from the company's money, clients' money. And the people that want to break the rule and be different in that environment don't quite face death, but certainly they get marginalized, or they find a way to fire you or put you in a position where you can't disrupt too much. And it's very difficult because you on paper, companies ask everyone to be creative, but very often those conditions to be creative and innovate are not really created within businesses.
That's absolutely true, because the funniest thing of all, as Jess said, in education for teacher training, everything that we do in the education leading up to you getting your teaching qualification, we talk about Paulo Freire and we talk about Pierre Bourdieu. So the whole curriculum is set up around these two guys. But when you've trained and you go off into the schools, you don't, and you're not allowed to implement the way that you've been trained to implement, because the whole thing is about finance. It's about budget. It's about meeting the drawdown of finance to keep the school, which are now running as a business. And in the whole art of engagement and training and teaching and learning, the whole art of that has gone out the window, because you're so pressurized to meet that drawdown line for the school to get its funding. And that's
Okay, we seem to have lost Olivia. The internet seems to be a little bit unstable. So let me just say that, this is a fascinating, intriguing discussion, and we are coming up to the end of our session here. So we will be able to continue this discussion and many others like this during the monthly follow-up sessions. We'll have monthly follow-up sessions every third Saturday of each month at 9 a.m., 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. We'll have those 3 different time slots for people to choose from because of the time zone differences. So the 9 a.m. slot is really good for the New Zealanders and the Australians, and the 7 p.m. slot is better for those based in the US. So we will continue these discussions, and this has been fascinating. Thank you very much for taking part, and bye for now. So just final.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jess.
And see you soon.
Thanks, ladies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks. Me too.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Very interesting indeed. Nice to meet you all.
Okay.